Jere is a geologist and a professor of integrative biology and curator in the Museum of Paleontology. He received his PhD at UCLA and then moved on to UC Davis for 21 years or so, I think he was at, and then finally found his way to Berkeley about 15 years ago or so. Looking at Jere's webpage, one of the things I noticed was an anecdote about his becoming interested in paleontology, and it had to do with reading a Donald Duck comic book when he was about 7, he says. And Huey, Dewey, and Louie, I think I remember the Duck's nephews, right, were running through a hall with a number of dinosaur skeletons that had been mounted, fossils, and there was a door with the word paleontologist on it. And Jere sort of thought to himself, I don't know what paleontology is, but that's what I want to do for the rest of my life because I can run around halls with dinosaur skeletons. In fact, he's taken it a bit further than that. His work on biology and geology has allowed him to run not only through museums with skeletons, but throughout the whole world with skeletons. He and I have worked in many of the same places, the Caribbean, Eniwetok, the South Pacific, Moorea, where Berkeley has a biological station, Papua New Guinea, Australia. But he's actually done me one better. I think he's a bit tougher. So he's also worked in the colder waters of the Antarctic and as well as Siberia and the Russian Arctic, where I would never go. So with that, today's talk is going to be Faulting California. Thank you, Jere.
Thanks, Roy. Especially about the Donald Duck business. Okay, if you turn around just quickly and look straight back, 4 blocks in that direction, it's the Hayward Fault. So before I do anything with my own talk here today, I want to talk to you first about what to do in an earthquake. How many of you know what to do in an earthquake? Okay, what have you done? What have you done in this room already to protect yourself from the San Andreas Fault? Here's the earthquakes that just happened in the last day, the last week, and the last few hours. And I downloaded this at 7:18 this morning. So this is the latest word from the USGS and all of those seismic stations up there, including Berkeley's, which could fall down in the big earthquake that's coming on the Hayward Fault, which could happen anytime after right now. So the first thing you should do is look around this room. Think about, what are we taught to do in an earthquake? Duck under something. What are you going to duck under? You're going down there. Well, I'm going in this little hole under here, okay? And there's only room for me. Now look around the room. False ceilings. They'll be coming down on top of you. Look at that projector up there. Now, not all of you have to worry about this. Because remember, these are northwest, southeast trending lateral slip faults. So the motion is going to be like that. So you guys right through there should worry about that thing coming down. I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to be under this thing up here. But this is the problem. I've talked to the seismic engineers around here about this building. Roy knows about this. And they say you should be prepared wherever you land to stay there for 3 days, because that's how long it'll take them to rescue you if the ambulances and fire engines can get here right afterwards, and the other people. Realistically, they say 7 days. Now, I'm going to be under here for 7 days, so I brought my earthquake bucket. It's got water. It's got 7 little bottles of water. That's not enough. I've got 3 granola bars. That's because I eat them. I keep them under my desk in my office, but I get hungry, and so I eat them. So I have to remember to replenish them. And I have some candy that a Brazilian visitor gave me. I have my first aid kit and some aspirin because it's going to get tiring under that thing. And I've got a book in here. Oh, actually, I didn't bring it because in my office, the bookcases are attached by 2 little angle irons and a molly bolt. And I'll have plenty of books. They're just going to come down like that. But I'll probably be bored and I need a flashlight to read by. And I have a screwdriver and my rock pick, which is about the extent of my mechanical abilities. And I'm going to get out of my office if I can with this. And my colleague Carol Hickman told me, well, you're well prepared with all this stuff, but what goes in's got to come out. So this is my bucket, and when the quake happens, maybe in 20 minutes, I'm going under here with my bucket. So I hope you guys have this in mind. Think about what you're going to do in case there's an earthquake while this lecture series is going on. It could save your lives. Let's take a look then at why California has this kind of activity, and it's all due to plate tectonics. And as you know, probably, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this stuff, plate tectonics is essentially the spreading of the ocean floor and its lateral movement, and it subducts underneath the continents over here. And when that subduction takes place, this subduction is not smooth. You'll see a little movie in a moment that shows it looks smooth, but it's not. It's jerky. In fact, subduction zones generate mega earthquakes, not like the little ones we have on the San Andreas Fault, which only get up to about 8.2. These generate things like 9.5 earthquakes in Chile or the Sumatran one. So these subduction zones are killers. And then we have lateral slip transform plate boundaries here, and although the San Andreas Fault is not in the ocean, that in fact is what it is. So here's California. We have all of this in California, all of the plate tectonic features. We have divergent boundaries here in the Gulf of California and the Imperial Valley. We've got transform boundaries, faults, the San Andreas system, because there's lots of faults. Just in the Bay Area, the major ones are San Andreas, Hayward, Calaveras, and a bunch of little ones. And then we have convergent boundaries up here at the Cascadia Trench, and that's a subduction zone, killer zones. All of these are problems for us. So we could expect in California to be exposed to megaquakes on this subduction zone, to normal earthquakes on the San Andreas system, and because of the megaquakes that are generated up in all the way around the Pacific, to tsunamis. All of these are related. Let's look at this from a perspective, though, in terms of people getting killed. In tsunamis, in recorded history in California, and in fact all of America, there have been about 245 people killed. In earthquakes, 3,459 have been killed. 3,000 of those are estimated to have been killed in the 1906 earthquake, but we don't know for sure. We know that there were about 700 Europeans killed, and many, many Chinese. They estimate 2,000, 3,000, but nobody assessed that. And hurricanes are the big killer, naturally, almost 20,000 people in the history of time. How does this compare to other threats to our lives? Here's the data for terrorists, including the war in Iraq. About 5,000 Americans killed so far. Guns since 9/11 have killed 98,000 people, 28,000 a year. Cars have killed almost 160,000. This year alone, 43,000 people have died on our highways, half of them not wearing seat belts. And secondhand smoke has killed 1,400,000. So, by these standards, Americans just killing Americans, not including terrorists, 1,655,000, earthquakes, maybe 3,000 or 4,000. So what we're talking about is not big numbers in terms of the hazards that we are experiencing. So in addition to having your earthquake bucket with you, when the earthquake happens, turns out that these guns, 98,000 people killed, they're mostly spouses and family members shooting each other. So in an earthquake, don't get near your spouse. Oh, thanks. In an earthquake, don't drive. And don't let anybody smoke around you. Those are the first three things to worry about. Then get out your earthquake bucket and start using it. So I'd like to show you a movie here of the plate tectonic motions of California, the North America really. And this is a clip from the museum website, which you can just see there. Let's look at this. I'm going to just run it here first, and it goes fast. That's 750 million years of Earth history in a second. Let's take it slowly, though. Here's North America over, get rid of that one. This is North America, 700 million years ago. The other parts of the world are so broken up that it's kind of hard to see them, but this will become China, this will become Siberia, this will become other parts of the world. Now, I'll go very slow here. So there goes North America, slipping southward to the South Pole at about 600 million years ago. At this time is when we see the first animal fossils. And then it begins to move north all the way up to the equator at about 540 to 500 million years ago. And so we're on the equator here, and we have fossils in California that show that, reefs, at that period of time. And then it continues, but now it begins to move south again after jumping up. See, it moves south, and then it goes back down. Now it's joining up with chunks of Europe and hitting into South America and some of the other continents at 360 million years ago. All of these continents now move together into the big continent that you know of as Pangaea. Pangaea is well formed at this time by all of the convergence of these continents together, plus island arcs and other bits and pieces of continental material spread throughout the world. This is the part of time now that I want to talk about, the last 250 million years. Watch what happens to California right there. This is the California coast. Nothing at all like California looks today, of course, because most of it wasn't there. So here it goes, slowly, if I can get it to go. It moves a bit. At about 210 million years, you can see the Atlantic opening a little bit in the northern part, a bit in the southern part, and now it's opening, and California is moving north and west. This is all a subduction zone. For the last 250 million years, it's a subduction zone with the mega earthquakes and all of the tectonics that go along with a subduction zone. And that lasts until just 28 million years ago. So we move on. The Atlantic opens up. Here's the end of the Cretaceous, extinction of the dinosaurs. Things are opening, but there are no mountain ranges of any size in California or anything else. Those come much, much later. And they are part of this subduction process. And then finally, we see the modern world. It's temporary. We're still moving as these things have shown with the seismic elements. So this just summarizes the last 250 million years of geological time for us that you saw there. Here's Pangaea, there we are. Things begin to spread, and this is the end of the Cretaceous, extinction of the dinosaurs. There were big seaways through here in the Mesozoic, and there were no big mountain ranges, not like the Sierras. And then today's situation, and it changes. This is all subduction from 250 or even before that to through 65 million years to about 30 million years when we finally override the Pacific plate and we begin to tear up the continental margin of California. So let's see some of these events and how they work. So you'll have to excuse me while I move this into the next thing. Tanya Atwater at Santa Barbara has put together a number of these movie clips on tectonics, and they're really good. This is subduction. And the thing to notice, this is what goes on for the 225 million years or so, even more, along our own coast. So imagine this is California at any time during that period of time. And what's happening is as subduction goes down here, it's sweeping sediment that's deposited in the trench and on the plates and volcanic material down into the trench and incorporating it, accreting it to the continental edge. And we'll see this tomorrow on our field trip. All this stuff mashed into the continent so you can hardly tell what these rocks are in some cases. And then as it moves on down, this oceanic plate under the continental plate, it generates a lot of heat. And that heat then moves up and forms the Sierra Nevada batholith underneath the continental margin. And so this movie will show that, and I'll just run it through once. The problem with it is it runs smoothly, and that's an average over geological time, but it doesn't do that on a daily basis. It sticks. Sometimes it's subducting, sometimes it's not subducting. And when it lets loose with one of these mega earthquakes, like the Sumatran one. So let's just watch this. Here goes the magma up to form these magma chambers. Some of it escapes in volcanism on the edge of the continent. Here's the sediments being accreted in here and jammed into the continent. And as I said, that's a sort of temporary, or an average view, I should say. The next view is the Pacific plate. Tanya did a great job with this one, too. She used all of these computer skills to draw these things. And in this view, 80 million years ago, here's the coast of North America. This is the Farallon plate and what will become the Juan de Fuca plate. And here's the Pacific plate, which today is right up against our continent. So this movie shows how that happened. Now watch. The North American plate will override these plates. This one is spreading in that direction, but the North American plate is spreading faster, so it overrides all of this. And when it finally hits the crest, this crest, that spreading center, it changes everything in California. And it creates the diversity that we see today geologically and biologically because it affects everything. So watch this. Here comes North America. There comes the Farallon plate. Is just about gone. At 28 million years ago, the North American plate overrides the Farallon plate, and now we're adjacent to the Pacific plate. And this continental margin has been ripped apart by transform faults along the San Andreas system. And all that happened about 28 million years ago, and it is continuing today. Eventually, as they like to say, Los Angeles will be a suburb of San Francisco, and Daly City will be up in the Gulf of Alaska. That's 50 million years from now, so don't worry about it. So let's take a look at the next little movie clip, which shows the details of this Farallon plate and the Pacific plate, which is moving in a northwesterly direction. The Farallon plate is moving that way, and the North American plate is going in this direction. The things to watch for here is look at the shape of Nevada. And the southwestern part of Arizona isn't even there, and California isn't there either. And this is just 40 million years ago, back in the Eocene. What happens when the North American plate overrides this crest, this spreading center between the Farallon and Pacific plate, is that it rips up that coastline. And it forms important features like the San Andreas Fault, our coastal margins, the Gulf of California. Baja California moves away from Mexico, and a lot of California slips to the north, and we'll see that later. Anyway, take a look at this now. There goes the Farallon plate. Now watch what happens when it hits. Okay, there goes the Mendocino Triple Junction. The Rivera Triple Junction is moving down the coast. The coast is now moving outward and expanding. Baja California is moving northward. The whole thing's coming together. And now we have the complicated fault system that we have. Here, there's the Mendocino Triple Junction between the Transform Fault and these other plates. This is the Cascadia subduction zone with its hazard of megaquakes. All of this then is the San Andreas Fault. And then down here's the Rivera Triple Junction. And then we get back into a subduction zone again, where we have, again, mega earthquakes. And then lastly, let me show you the details of this California bit. So this is for the last 20 million years, mainly in Southern California. I like this one. Here's San Diego. There's Santa Barbara. It's written sideways because this block of rocks is going to twist around. San Francisco and LA don't even exist 20 million years ago. I mean, the terrain upon which they sit isn't there yet. And this is then about 8 million years after the collision. So here's the Mendocino Triple Junction and the Rivera Triple Junction down there, and this is the seismic, or the plate gap there, where there is no subduction going on. But this is part of California, and that's still part of California. And these triple junctions move both north and south as this spreading, as this transform action along the San Andreas system takes place. Now watch this. Okay, there it goes. It's ripping up California. It's twisting around the transverse ranges. Los Angeles begins to appear right about there, and San Francisco goes up there. And there we are. The Gulf of California forms, starts forming in the Miocene. It's completed in a couple million years ago. And you'll notice a whole bunch of faults. This transverse ranges that you have to drive over the ridge route to get to LA if you ever go there. And here's some big lateral faults that are moving in east-west directions instead. You want to see that again? Pretty cool. I bet you never thought about that. I didn't. When I learned about the San Andreas Fault, we didn't know about plate tectonics. Okay, so the Pacific plate's moving northwest. The North American plate is moving also sort of in a northwesterly direction. So what this, you can sort of imagine, it's not a head-on collision like two cars running into each other head-on. It's more like on the freeway when some idiot's in front of you going slow and you ram him from the behind as he moves across into your lane. Because they're coming at a different angle, so you hit him on the left rear fender or something. And then you end up with a big mess on your car that sort of looks like that. So there it goes again. This is really important to get this concept. There goes San Francisco, Monterey, moving northward. All of this extends the geography of the western North America outward westerly, and Nevada takes on its shape, Arizona takes on its shape, and importantly, California does as well, because all this material is getting subducted and transformed northward in this area. So let me get on then with some other material now that you have this general background of what's going on. You can check these out. It's really a nice site to take a look at with these downloads. And she has a number of them there that she's worked on to put this together. So the subduction one I've mentioned, it's the same website. Okay, here's a summary of what we've seen then. Here comes the Pacific Plate. Here's the Farallon Plate. North American Plate overrides this boundary. Here's the Mendocino Triple and Rivera Triple junctions. They move north and south with the lateral slip San Andreas system between them. And then it all starts about 28 million years ago where this collision takes place and then develops over time, and this affects everything. The biology, the evolution of our marine fauna, because we're developing basins in this area, offshore, deep basins that the sharks that you'll hear about later inhabit that were never there before during a subduction zone. These basins create new isolated habitats. The same thing is going on the land. In this subduction zone situation, there are hardly any mountains. And maybe 10 million years ago in this situation, we begin to see the Sierras rise up 10, 11 million years ago, a little bit. And the coast ranges are doing a little bit of jumping around. But it's not until just 2 million years ago or so, 3 million in the case of the Sierras, that they really get going up. And we can see that evidence when we go up the Sierras by looking at the volcanic rocks, the Merton Formation, and some other ones that have flowed down the slopes of the Sierras in old river channels as the last gasp of this subduction situation. As they rise up. So this is the North Pacific situation. Here we are with the San Andreas Fault. It's all connected. We're connected worldwide geologically, not just by computers and the internet. Here's the subduction situation in the north part. It includes Northern California. Here's the subduction zones down in Mexico and south to the tip of South America. And all this stuff out here. The Pacific Plate is huge today, but it used to be little. Remember, 100 million years ago, it was little. And it was the Farallon Plate that was so big. So all of this then leads to seismicity, earthquakes, and faulting of California that I want to tell you about. And this is just the earthquake epicenters for this 20-year period. And you can map the plate boundaries on it. I do this in my classes. I give the class a map like this, and I say, draw the plate boundaries and label them. And I'll give you a clue. The plates are named for the area that they are in. For example, the Pacific Plate is named the Pacific Plate because that's where the Pacific Ocean is. That's the Pacific Plate. So I get the students, they get the boundaries. I mean, everybody's connected dots in the newspaper, right? No big deal. They connect these dots like that, and then they label this the Antarctic Plate. They flunk. So where do you think the San Francisco 1906 earthquake stands in terms of magnitude, and is it a great earthquake or not? It was about an 8.25 on the Richter scale. And here's the 10 greatest earthquakes. Down in Chile in 1960, a 9.5. Remember, the Richter scale for every one of those divisions, it's a logarithmic scale, is 10 times greater in amplitude on the seismographs. More energy, 30 times the amount of energy is released. There's that big earthquake. That's the biggest one ever recorded. The second biggest one is the 1964 Alaska earthquake that caused tsunamis. This one also caused tsunamis, but they didn't get us because we fortunately have a boundary that runs parallel to most of the direction of the wave fronts, unless they come from over here. So this one generated a tsunami. This one did too. This one killed people in Hawaii and Japan. This one sent waves down our coast, and 11 people at Crescent City died in this, one at Bodega Bay and another one in Southern California. Crescent City seems to just focus these tsunamis. So they've cleaned up their waterfront, did away with buildings, and made a nice park there. So you can imagine, picture this, Sunday afternoon, they're playing baseball out there, having a picnic. The subduction zone right offshore, they're on the subduction zone, they're not on the San Andreas Fault. It snaps. They got 10 minutes. A huge quake. They're running all over the place. They're trying to read those signs that say tsunami evacuation route. Some of them are going to run out into the ocean because the wave causes the seafloor to be exposed, and so they're going to go out there and collect some clams and stuff for later that afternoon. And then the big wave comes and hits them and wipes them all out. So they need more advanced warning, but you can't get it on that subduction zone because they're so close to the coastline. There's just not enough time. We're talking minutes. Sumatra, the fourth, they've actually revised this now, it's the fourth largest earthquake. If they'd had a tsunami warning system, everybody could have been warned because this was 2.5 hours away from the earthquake in terms of the tsunami. Over here it was 6 to 8 hours. If this earthquake actually produced a tsunami warning for Hawaii and for our coast, but didn't work very well.
What's magnitude of that?
It was about a 9. This is a 9.2. Excuse me. No, that was a 9.2. This is, they're still revising this one. I saw it was a, you know, when it first happened, they said it was an 8.7. Then they upped it to a 9, and I think it's now up to a 9.2. It's hard to keep up with all this stuff. There's this huge earthquake in China, and that's an interplate collision between India moving northward and Asia. And that generated huge earthquakes, and we often recall that 600,000 people is kind of a normal number to kill in China during one of these earthquakes. Or if you're over here in Iran and some of these places in Turkey, which is a terrible place for earthquakes as well, 40,000 is a pretty good number. This is what the North American seismographs looked like for the Sumatra quake. Here comes the P wave, and then the S wave, and this is the shaking wave, and this did a lot of damage. And these are places like Boston, and Berkeley's on here somewhere. But this shows you how it works. The seismogram's going along, it detects the P wave coming in, which is the surface pressure wave, and then it gets the shear wave or shaking wave coming in, and that's the one that gets everything going. I thought you'd like to see what we do here at Berkeley. This is a giant eucalyptus tree falling down in Woodside across the bay, and they detected it on their seismogram. There's the P wave of that thing falling down, and here comes the S wave in there. That was about a 150-foot eucalyptus tree that just fell over. So they were a little worried about this. I mean, what fault caused that earthquake, right? Well, no big problem. We got so many faults around that, you know, it's just an unknown. But they figured it out. Here's one aftershock on March 27th of the Sumatra earthquake. This was an 8.7 aftershock. I mean, the second thing to remember while you're underneath the table or down in those aisles is that there's going to be aftershocks. So get more stuff over you. Here it is. That's the normal background. And then in comes this quake, 8.7, thousands of miles away. And by triangulating and looking at all these records, and that's the reason they revise these things, is because the data comes in, a seismologist at the USGS or Berkeley takes a look at it, and they do a few quick calculations. They give you an estimate because they know you want that. But then they refine them because a lot more data comes in. Remember that. Here's the tsunami generated by that. 250,000 people at least, maybe 300,000, were killed by this tsunami. This is about 2 hours out. And then over here's even more. And then I wanted to show you this animation of what happens to the tsunami wave as it goes across the world. Now this is kind of interesting. Okay, we'll try a different version here. Let's see. Is that working? Yeah, there comes the wave. That's 2 hours out. And watch the Indian Ocean. This wave propagates across. This is going 500 kilometers an hour. It propagates over to Africa, and then it'll start bouncing around in the Indian Ocean. So you have several different wave fronts, and they hit Africa and other places. Now notice they're going back. They're going back to Sumatra here. But some of them sneak around Australia up through here, and they come around into the Pacific. They come around from the Indian Ocean and go up into the Atlantic. And this tsunami affected every coastline in the world. In fact, here in California, we have 10 tsunamis a year. You probably didn't know that. Nobody tells you that. I'll tell you why they don't tell you that in just a second.
How many inches, California? Centimeters, millimeters?
For this, I'll show you. So there's the wave as that wave went around the world. It took 24 hours or something for it to get around. Okay. So here's the data on the size of the tsunami in the Pacific. 50 centimeters in Chile, 19 in Chile, another place. Pago Pago, 13. And down here, San Francisco was 20 centimeters, San Diego 22 centimeters, that's about 8 inches or so. But notice, Manzanillo, Mexico, 260 centimeters, 8.6 feet. That tsunami was magnified by the submarine topography and the shape of the coast in those little bays down there. In 1995, they had an earthquake and tsunami that killed 41 people in the Manzanillo area. We have, in fact, sampled that to look at the paleontology and to tell the history of this event. So these are the aftershocks from the Sumatra earthquake right there for 1 month. Every single day after that, there were at least, even now, 3 earthquakes of magnitude greater than 6 that were generated by the readjustments of this thing. That event raised the sea floor 60 feet in some areas and over a 600-mile or so front. That's why you had such a huge wave generated. About the only other thing that could generate that kind of a wave would be a 10-kilometer asteroid hitting the ocean. Here's the 1964 megaquake and tsunami with 110 dead people, and this is the wave coming out. You see it comes down the coast. We're kind of parallel to it, and we don't see it. We also have high coasts, cliffs, but at Crescent City, because of the submarine topography and other things there, they magnify these tsunamis just like they did at Manzanillo. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. Here's a tsunami event, hypothetical, out of the Cascadia subduction zone right up near Washington. And this is what that would look like. Now, we got interested in the history of these things, and so we began to investigate using microfossils by taking cores through the edge of the continent and trying to reconstruct the history so that we could understand how often do these megaquake events take place, and do they generate tsunamis, and what's that history. We got some money from the university's Pacific Rim Project, and we went around they cut the money in half, so we cut the area in half. We only did the eastern Pacific, not the western Pacific, or we probably would have been in Sumatra. The idea, the way this works, is that as subduction takes place, it drags the edge of the coast downward, like that. This stress that's being built up by the subduction and the dragging down of the edge of the continent is reversed in a mega earthquake, and it goes back up in a few seconds. We can see that in the fossil record of, if we drill down with cores in these marshes and mangrove swamps, and then by analyzing the microfossils that occur in there, we can tell you the environments and how much motion there was on this upward or downward trend. And this is the sort of sequence you see. Essentially, there's subsidence going on as the continental margin is pulled down. This submerges the trees die, and then when there's a big earthquake, they may bounce back up. Here's some small subsidence between maybe 2, 3, 5, or 10 years before the major fracture. We've discovered a precursor event that isn't a predictor, but at least a warning that the big earthquake may be coming. So there's a precursor event, there's a major earthquake, it lays down a layer of sand in a tsunami across the place, and then by taking a core we can see that sand and the organisms that are in it. The organisms that come in on the tsunami are different than the ones that live there. We can tell this. Very simple. And so on. The way we do that is we drill a core through a marsh. Here's my colleague Dave doing that. Here's the ghost forest, as they call it, that's been submerged under the water, seawater, as the edge of the continent is bent down. And you see these. And so we went around and we sampled for the 64 earthquake. We looked at the Oregon coastline. We looked at Manzanillo. And we looked at North Island, which is on a subduction zone, New Zealand. There's Sumatra. This is what we'd like to do this coming summer, maybe. These are the organisms we use. They're called foraminifera. They're single-celled organisms. And they're very sensitive to within 5 centimeters of tidal height. So we can tell when that coastline goes down. We can tell when it snaps back, because these organisms in the snapback are no longer there because they need marine water. In comes a freshwater assemblage of other kinds of organisms that we also detect. So we can see these events. Let me show you what we did in New Zealand before we get to the other areas. Here's the subduction zone. This is interesting because it's a lot like California. Here's the subduction zone with the Pacific plate moving underneath North Island. And then it transforms along the Alpine Fault, which is very similar to California's San Andreas Fault. When I was a graduate student, we studied the Alpine Fault to give us insight into what was going on the San Andreas. And then it joins up with this other subduction zone. So we went here to Hawke's Bay. And in Hawke's Bay, this entire area was hit by a mega earthquake in 1931. Many people were killed, but what's really important is this bay. This is the bay that occurs right near Napier on this coastline. And this whole thing was a lagoon, big bay. It was several meters, it was at least a meter deep. And in 1931, on that earthquake, in a matter of a couple of seconds, it went up a meter, meter and a half, and it all drained out. And the bay was no longer. And now, up in this area, they have, this is like the Napa Valley of New Zealand, and they plant vineyards in here, and there's one up here, I love this place. It's called Crab Farm Vineyard. And the reason they do it, the name is because every time they dig a hole to plant a grapevine, they find a fossil crab from before 1931. Isn't that cool? So we drilled a bunch of sites in here. My colleagues down in New Zealand have worked all this material up, and we see tsunami events. We see things going back 3,000 years, and we have some idea of that history there. And it's similar to what we see in Anchorage at Girdwood and the city of Anchorage, and down here at Netarts Bay in Oregon, where we did this same kind of sampling. This is what we see in Alaska. Here's this total organic carbon, a bunch of other things. The thing to look at are these organisms over here. These are different kinds of freshwater organisms. And then there's subsidence after the quake. This is all pre-quake stuff. Sometimes it works in reverse, so we went into subsidence. Here's marine organisms, and that's the quake event. We see maybe 5 to 10 years before that some kind of precursor to this, a little bit of subsidence. We still don't know what's going on. We're not seismologists. We're paleontologists and geologists, but our seismo people are really interested in this now. We see the same thing in Netarts Bay, a precursor. We see some sand material. Here's the sand coming in across this. That's the quake deposition of sand, probably in a tsunami. So here's sort of a summary. Those diagrams are a little hard to read. Here's in Alaska. This is what we see in our cores there. Here's the 64 earthquake. We see maybe a 10-year precursor on that event in one of 3 sites. At 1,800 years before the present time, we see another precursor event 10 years before that, and then a mega earthquake. Here's Netarts Bay. 300 years before the present, there was a big mega earthquake. We see the sand come across. We don't think that sand was a tsunami. It doesn't have the right fauna in it. It had a precursor event. Here's another one, 1670 BP. That sand has the tsunami fauna in it. So this was a big tsunami. 1840, same thing. with a precursor, another precursor at 3,000. So this gives you a history of how often these events strike this coast. We could do the same thing in Sumatra and save them a few bucks, because if it takes 300 years or 1,000 or 1,300 years to generate enough stress on that Sumatra subduction zone to create another tsunami, and we could see this in the fossil record, then they could relax, take their time, build it up properly, get the tsunami system in order. Okay, I want to move on to California, where we get these tsunamis up here at Crescent City, but the big hazards are the San Andreas system. So let's take a look at that in the last few moments. Here's the big earthquakes in California starting in 1906, 8.25 recalculated from data. They didn't have a Richter scale at the time. Here's a big one there. The Imperial Valley earthquake. These in yellow didn't have much damage because they're mainly in remote areas. Here's the Tehachapi earthquake in 1952, a 7.7. It did damage in Los Angeles. I even remember it as a little kid. The San Fernando earthquake in 71. Not a big earthquake. The aftershocks in Sumatra are bigger than that. And this did much, much damage to the freeway systems and everything else down there. Coalinga, the same deal. Here's Loma Prieta. You know about that one because you were probably in it, right? How many of you were not in it? Ah, I got you, didn't I? A few. I was in it over here in another building. I thought it was about like a 4 on the Hayward Fault right over here, but boy, I was really surprised. I went back to my office in McCone Hall, and I thought, after sitting there for an hour or so, gee, I wonder if I was right on my guess. Went down to the seismograph there, and there's a huge crowd standing around it. They're talking about buildings burning up and everything. I thought, wow, I missed that one, didn't I? And then Northridge, lots of damage there too. So here's the ones in the faults in the Bay Area. Tomorrow on our field trip, we're going to examine the Hayward Fault. We're going to cross over, go up this way, look at the subduction zone complex, look at the San Andreas and Tamales Bay, and then come home. And hopefully there won't be any big activity there tomorrow. But these are the faults that are worrisome. The Hayward Fault and the San Andreas, and I'll show you right here the probabilities of earthquakes on each of these faults. That gives us a total probability in the next 30 years of a 62% chance of an earthquake greater than 6.7. 6.7 does some damage. Here's the Hayward Fault, 27%. San Andreas in this area, 21%. And that varies area to area. And some of the other ones are interesting. These over here are not as active, 3%, so on. Calaveras down here is 11%. San Gregorio, 10%. So the biggies are still these two. There is a group of people that say the Hayward Fault, and I know this because I live on it, right about there. It's creeping all the time. Little ones, 2s, 3s, you can feel them, especially at night when you're lying in bed. Around my house, you can't feel anything during the day. This is a modified Mercalli intensity. This shows damage, and this is recalculated for the 1906 earthquake. And these are huge areas of damage. And you can see where they are, and the damage extended along sort of the trace of the fault. This is the break of the 1906 earthquake. And this has just been published this month. I want to show you a few pictures of what happens in these things, and then think about what you would do and how to deal with these situations. This is San Fernando, 1971. Major earthquake. It destroyed the freeways. Look at that. It just jammed the concrete like that. It snapped up. It took a few seconds. Here's a guy. He's driving along the freeway, 60 miles an hour. He sees it crumple. He hits his brakes, and he launches himself into the air. It happens fast, folks. How many of you were driving during Loma Prieta? What did you think was going on with your car?
It seemed like I had a blowout.
Yeah. How about you? Yeah, I know. My wife said that she thought she had a flat tire too, but she kept driving. Said you should always stop if you think you have a flat tire. This guy wasn't so lucky. This is, what was the name of this hospital there? Olive View Hospital, right? This is the Olive View Hospital. This is the stairwell that goes up here. This building was okay. This, however, was the first floor of this building, which is now about 3 feet tall. This is what will happen to us, and I will be under there for 7 days with my bucket. I don't know what you guys are going to do, but I'm not coming out. But I will have my pick. So this is the status then that you can expect to have your emergency buildings in. This is the reason, though, that we're going to have to wait 7 days. These are the ambulances. How are they going to go get anybody? Be self-sufficient. And remember, these earthquakes, it's particularly bad. The worst nightmare scenario for me in this area is an earthquake on October 10th as the Santa Ana type winds are blowing out this way. The houses go down, the water heaters explode with the gas, and we have another 1991 fire. And you can't get around because remember in Loma Prieta, that earthquake snapped the tops off of the redwood trees and they fell down and blocked the roads and the roads were all messed up. You cannot rely on the government to help you because they can't, even if they want to, because their ambulances are under something like that. There are other ways around the problem. You can pray. Let me just quickly end here with our own campus, where you're sitting today. This is the trace of the Hayward Fault. I assume you're laughing because you're really feeling a little uptight about this. Our building is located right about there, where you're sitting in this area. This is from ABAG. There's the website. And they've done this. So this is the hazard zone, the big hazard zone. It's all a hazard zone. Down here, it's really bad. Why is that? Bay mud. Bay mud. These buildings have all been seismically retrofit. This is our building. Roy tells me, I talked to the seismic engineers when this building was rehabilitated for us. That's what I call it, reconstructed. And they said it's seismically the strongest building on campus. So I'm talking to Roy, what are you going to do in an earthquake? I said, I'm going to, run out and get my car and go away. Back to the guns and stuff in my house. And Roy told me, don't do that because the walls are going to fall off this building. They'll just go out like that because the walls are 1931 and these walls inside have been reconstructed in 1995. This is the campus in 1907, actually, but in 1906, this is South Hall. It's still here. They've rehabilitated that one, and it's seismically good. Bacon Hall's gone, North Hall is gone, and those agricultural buildings are gone. But these withstood, with some damage, the 1906 earthquake. And so we have this tradition, and the Campanile has been fixed up. But I don't trust these guys. I tell you. I remember they had a big earthquake in Caracas. All the buildings fell down. Venezuela said, we built the California building codes. Here's Memorial Stadium. We're going to see this tomorrow. Not with the drill team here, but what we're going to look at is the Hayward Fault, which runs right through there. It doesn't run up like that, but the crack that we will see tomorrow runs right through section KK. And we're going to go look at that. It's offset, and the campus has put a big steel plate there to hold the fault from moving the stadium apart. It's now bent about that far, so it goes like that. But the chancellor is working on getting us $100 million to build a new stadium. I wonder where they're going to put it. Some people have suggested right down here at University and Oxford. I think it should be down in the bay. Here's the summary of losses they estimate for the Berkeley campus with an occasional fault movement on the these are Hayward faults. $720 million. That's not a big deal. I mean the earthquake. There's a rare event, $1,700,000,000. And here's a very rare, very large event like the 1868 earthquake, $2 billion. $3 billion in total. $3 billion damage to the campus. When I was telling the Museum of Paleontology group this, one of the students said, well, they have a plan to move the campus. After the earthquake, I mean, you know, that's probably what they'll have to do, because they're going to have to rebuild the whole damn place. But where are they going to do it? They're going to build it next to a fault almost anywhere they want. I think they ought to rebuild it in Kansas. So, all of this stuff that I've been telling you relates to California's geologic and biological diversity. The subduction and accretion and transform faulting have created California the way we see it. The subduction has given us our mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, the coast ranges, the offshore basins. LA was a basin. There's LA. A basin. Santa Barbara was a basin. Santa Maria, these areas, they were all basins that were deep, like 6,000 feet deep in the geological past. You've seen how that has happened and how it's transformed into what we see today. That action is continuing. And we'll see some of it tomorrow on our field trip that leaves and goes up in this direction and back to Berkeley. So thanks very much.